This is TWiT.
Tell us a bit about sort of the general way you approach measuring TVs.
Well, generally, I think, the first step's always starting with finding the best picture mode, right? You want to try and find the most accurate picture mode and or the picture mode that allows you to get the most accurate picture. So some picture modes may not have as many of adjustments as other picture modes. So the first thing is getting it out of the box, burning it in. You want to get a little wear and tear on it, making sure it's software updated, making sure everything's in order with it. And then going through the process of, okay, well, let's look at, you can usually tell something like Vivid is probably not going to be your ideally calibrated mode.
That'll not be my first choice generally, no.
No, you can usually tell that pretty quickly. But, if it gets close, you start making the measurements. You start saying, okay, well, where's my grayscale here? How's my color gamut mapping going? Do I have any range? Do I have any adjustments? You may find a mode where you go, oh, this mode might look good, but I don't have any grayscale adjustments. I can't adjust the grayscale. So, okay, let me find the mode that's now going to let me do that. And then in some sets, you might find there's actually more. And I think what I'm seeing more and more in the industry is memories like Vivid and sports and movie, for the most part, are starting to just become a name for memory 1, memory 2, memory 3, meaning a lot of these modes have all the adjustments in them, and you simply have different starting points from them. And you can almost get most of them to match. Now, there are some things in some TVs and some settings where, there's an underlying process happening outside of the user menu, maybe in the factory menu, or maybe even more deep, something you can't get to. That's maybe a specific lookup table or color table in that Vivid mode that you simply can't adjust. But in a lot of TVs nowadays, a lot of it's being put into the user menu. And one of the things I like about Sony is they love to tell you what they're doing for the most part. So what I mean by that is, when you go to color space, you can choose Rec 709. There's no wide, there's no normal. What's normal, right? What's wide?
Exactly.
Until you measure it, you don't know. But on a Sony, and not just the A1E, but on a lot of their sets, they're very attuned to, okay, well, we're going to call that Rec 709 because that's HD color. We're going to call that Rec 2020 because that's Ultra HD color, right? And we're going to call that one DCI-P3. It even has DCI-P3 in a consumer TV, which is awesome. I mean, I don't know how many people really need that, but it's awesome.
Well, you do need it. Yes, Ultra HD Blu-ray is specified for Rec 2020 color, but here's a little wrinkle. At the moment, there are no TVs that can do 2020 color. They are, in fact, more closer to DCI-P3, which is the color gamut that's used in commercial cinemas. And so that's what most UHD Blu-rays are mastered to or graded to right now is DCI-P3. So why wouldn't you pick DCI-P3 if you had that choice in your color space menu? Would you always pick 2020 for a UHD Blu-ray?
Yes, Scott. So you would actually pick 2020 for the UHD Blu-ray, and here's why. So the system, the standard is Rec 2020, and the way you kind of need to think about it, and Stacy Spears actually helped me a lot with kind of getting my mind into this different mindset, right? Like there is no spoon, right? You kind of have to think about it.
There is no spoon, right?
Yeah, you kind of have to think about it a little more abstractly. So the 2020 is a container, and you're filling that container with color, and you might only be looking at DCI-P3, at the P3 color gamut on your monitor when you're mastering, which is how a lot of stuff is being done, because that's the limit of a lot of these displays that are out there today is the P3 color gamut. Right. But when they're mastering the content onto the disc, the digital bits, the data of like where that RGB, let's say triplet is, right? So let's say it's, 275, 275, 275, which would be white, but let's just use that for the sake of me not having to think about what would equal what.
What would actual red be? Yeah, right.
Yeah, what would red be at, 50% luminance and this and then, whatever. Anyway, so if you're thinking about it that way, that is just going to map within this container. So the container is yay big. but your display can only do this much. But you're still putting the data in this container. You're just not putting data at these edges because there's no data to have there per se. You're only working with the P3. So the TV then looks at the container and only maps to the edge of what it has. So if that's P3, it just fills it up to P3 and ignores anything outside of it.
So in other words, the container isn't completely full, shall we say, as a metaphor.
Exactly. So from the decode standpoint, if you were to decode P3, if the set's like, oh, I think this is P3, it's now going to try to map data in the 2020 format into the P3 space. So you're gonna have some conversion error there, where it's not interpreting what that bit level is and where that bit level should be within the 2020 space. So on the TV, you generally want to go to that 2020 space, and then you want to allow the data wants you to go to the 2020 space, and you want to allow the display to then map that to the 2020 space as well, even though you may not get anything more than P3 from it.
Right.
So when we sorry, Scott, just one more thing. So when we calibrate, when a calibrator calibrates today, a lot of what we're doing is we're generating 2020 data and measuring for P3. And even at the studios, for a lot of the displays, because very few are going wider than that, for a lot of the displays are out there, there are a couple like that PVMX300 that can go further out, and you can kind of play with it and say, I'm going to put it in 2020 and measure 2020, and you'll see what it does. But for most displays, we generate 2020, and then we set our systems, our calibration systems, to measure the P3 targets. Otherwise, you're just going to see the stuff clips out at the edge and everything's scrunched together, and you can't really tell what's going on because it's being clipped out at the end. Right.
Okay, so you pick the right mode. You measure, you pick the right color standard, you pick the right color temperature, which in most cases on consumer TVs, I don't know about Sony. Does Sony actually specify color temperature in terms of degrees Kelvin, or do they also, like most, do cool, normal, and warm?
That's a good point. Actually, Sony does do cool, normal, and warm. I think I think there's a warm and maybe even a warm 2. But it would be nice if they actually did put the Kelvin, wouldn't it? Maybe we can get them to do that.
Maybe we can. If somebody's watching, think about that. And oddly, the color temperature mode that is usually the most accurate is the warm one.
Yes, absolutely. The most accurate mode in almost any TV on the market is one of the warm ones, right? A lot of sets now have a warm 1 and a warm 2. We see that, in most sets I think out there have more than one warm, but usually one of them is closer to the D65 standard white point that we're shooting for.
Right.